Good morning. Well, not morning, this afternoon, but still, the sentiment is still there, right? Welcome to the JB show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I am your host, James Fauntleroy. It is so good to see all of you here with me today. Today is Sunday, August 28th, 2022. And just to let you guys know, the JB show streams every single Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch me on the RBN Live on Tuesdays at 4, and you can catch me on the Sabby and JB show on Thursdays at 6. Just to let you guys know, if you guys have not yet, please make sure to smash that like button as well as ring that bell so that you guys know whenever we go live, you get that notification. And thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. For without you guys, we would not have the lights on. So thank you so much for being there. I just want to express my heartfelt appreciation to all of you. Now, I am not going to waste any time. I would like to introduce my special guest for today. He is a member of the Midwestern Marxist group. They are on YouTube as well as on TikTok and does very educational TikToks, by the way. I
Thank you.
have with you host Eddie Liger. Eddie, so good to see you here on the JB Show. Welcome.
Thank you, JB. I'm a huge fan of you and the Revolutionary Blackout Network and all the great work you guys are doing. So super pumped to be on the show today.
Yeah. Eddie, I just want to say that I definitely appreciate the educational work you're doing in enlightening people, especially a lot of young people, on what Marxism, leftism is. You're also really good at giving foreign policy analysis, especially historical analysis, to what's going on around the world in different countries, and not going by the State Department narrative that has been set out within the United States. And so it's really giving the objective history versus the history that the victors put in the history books. So I definitely want to express my appreciation to you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, we think that the current stage of capitalism is monopoly capitalism and is imperialism. So to be anti-capitalist, you have to be anti-imperialist, and
Mm-hmm.
which means debunking the lies of imperialism. So that's been one of our
Yeah.
main focuses. So thank
Mm.
you.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Socialist MMA, Nick, who is also in the chat. I think that a collaboration between you two talking about foreign policy would be fire because two are definitely foreign policy nerds. I'm trying to become better in foreign policy. I'm still learning. So I'm looking at people like you and Nick, Dr. Luna Oy, Danny Haifong. I'm looking at people like you guys, when it comes to foreign policy, and I'm learning a lot. And when you start to learn about the foreign policy and what the United States has done for the sake of imperialism, it has really opened your eyes to holy shit, we really screwed over the world. And so, I just, shout out to you, Nick, for being, in the chat. Thank you so much for being here.
For sure. Yeah, there's that idea that socialism has always failed, and then once you start looking into foreign policy, it's like, well, I mean, it's failed when the US sanctions these countries or sends in their military or does a coup or backs fascist gangs to overthrow whatever left-wing president took power. And
Hmm.
socialism has raised millions of people out of poverty abroad, and the US has done everything they can to stop that from happening. So I don't know. I feel like once you learn about foreign policy, it's almost impossible not to be a socialist.
Yeah, and just to that point, I remember because I'm not sure if you're familiar with Robert Durden. He does the Political Fight Club on the Indie News Network,
Hmm.
and he was doing the reading of Parenti's book Black Shirts and Reds.
Nice.
And in that book, I think Parenti was actually talking about how a lot of people, especially during the Soviet Union, were so uh, they were so used to how good things were in the Soviet Union. Yeah, there you go. I don't have the book, but I heard it through Robert Durden's reading.
For sure.
But he was talking about how a lot of them didn't really realize how good they had it until the Soviet Union fell.
Right.
And so I think it's kind of a reverse. we don't realize how bad we have it until we actually get our material needs met like it's supposed to be.
Right. It's
Mm-hmm.
Carlos, who runs Midwestern Marks with me, or is one of our other
Mm-hmm.
main editors. He said it's sort of like the show The Good Place. I don't know if people have seen that, where you think you're in heaven, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
have all this consumerism and we're the richest country on earth. But actually, everybody's drowning in debt. The most powerful people in the country are like giant real estate capitalists or giant pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies profiting off healthcare, who are
Yeah.
tied together with the banks, and their whole goal is to exploit, to get people trapped in debt. So
Mm-hmm.
you're just getting nickeled and dimed at every turn, and having consumerism thrown in your face.
Yeah.
And yeah, you a lot of people now. Carlos told me this. The majority of people who leave Cuba now end up going back, because Cuba doesn't have as much wealth, but they have housing and they have access to education. So here we have the best healthcare system in the world technologically, but nobody has access to it because of the insurance companies and because of the for-profit companies there. So and yeah, you're totally right about the Soviet Union. One thing, a saying from some of the former Soviet citizens that I like is, everything they told us about communism was a lie, but everything they told us about capitalism was true. So the Soviet Union didn't end up becoming, this communist, not utopia, but basically it didn't become the society that they were trying to create it, or that they were trying to create. But once capitalism came back, they realized that everything the communists had been telling them about capitalism was true. Unemployment went from like zero. They hadn't experienced unemployment in years. You would just work for the state, and it shot up to like 20%. There were
Mm-hmm.
people experiencing homelessness for the first time. This is in every former Soviet state. It was an absolute human rights disaster. People
Mm-hmm.
dying of malnutrition, mass poverty, drugs and sex trafficking flowing back over the border for the first time in like 80 years.
Mm-hmm.
All these things that the people um, kind of were tricked into believing. A lot of the people were tricked into believing that capitalism wouldn't bring these things back, but it in fact did. Um, so yeah, and this is a great book that goes over that. Mine's actually, I like to point out, my copy's signed by Parenti. So shout out to Andy. One of my viewers got it signed and sent this to me. So he's the man.
Nice. Nice. I wish my book by Parenti was signed, but
That's a good one.
unfortunately, this is bro. I literally okay. So I have a friend who's also a communist, right? And we actually had a slight disagreement. Not really a disagreement. It's like he could convince me to his position, and I can convince him to my position. But we were trying to gauge whether the United States is fully fascist or proto-fascist. He
Hmm.
made the argument for more proto-fascist. He's like, we're right at that knife's edge, right when we trip over into fascism. And I said, and I thought, because of reading Out of Parenti and George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, which I also have to happen right here, is that I think we are fully fascist now. And so he thinks we're proto. And he was like, you make good points about us being fully, and I thought he made great points about us being proto. But even still, even though we're on slight degrees of that opinion, the fact is that we're basically in that circle of fascism now. And the crazy part is when I say something like that, people will say, "Oh, you're being hyperbolic," and I'm like, "No, look at the elements that you see within this country. The fact that somebody, like Ron DeSantis can be governor in this country with the ideas and the type of suppression of our rights that he has done in the state that I live in, you don't find that creepy, and uh so yeah, I mean, I just, appreciate the work that a lot of these authors have done, and really enlightening us to, what has happened in the past and how either history may not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I go back and forth with that question myself, because it is, you read the U.S.'s history from these sort of alternative narratives, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
the Operation Paperclip or whatever it was called filtered all
Yeah.
these former Nazis into
Yeah.
positions of power in the West. And then the
Mhm.
West becomes the dominant world global power, enforcing itself violently via NATO,
Yeah.
colonizing basically half the world, which is basically Germany's plan for Europe. What they wanted to do to Europe is what the U.S. and NATO have done to the global South, which the global South is now fighting back, and or they have been for the last 70 years against the
Yeah.
U.S. empire. But
Yeah.
and then there's other things too, like George Bush's grandpa, Prescott Bush, made
Mhm.
all his money working with Hitler and the Nazis, and that's how his corporation got all his money. Now, years later, we've had two Bush presidents. They tried to give us another one with Jeb Bush. So we've got these Nazi descendants running our country and invading countries like Iraq, killing millions of people. It's like, okay, what's the difference between us and fascist Germany then? And I get how people can think that's hyperbolic, and I don't know, but I mean, Ron DeSantis is a good point though, because he represents, we know capitalism's in decay. We know living standards are getting worse here in the U.S., in the heart of the empire. And then you have these goofballs like Ron DeSantis who come along and they say the problem's the Democrats. The problem is these social justice warriors. I'm never going to give class analysis. I'm never going to do anything for the working class. I'm always going to serve the same weapons manufacturers and billionaire donors that the Democrats serve. But I'm going to trick you into being on my side by being bigoted. And that,
Yeah.
that is what I really see like fascism is bigotry and violence in order to save capitalism and decay, and organize people around hatred rather than organizing them around socialism. So, I mean, whether it's proto-fascist or fascist, I'm not sure. But I mean, the point, like you said, remains the same. We have people who could be considered violent fascist leaders in power of our country.
Yeah, it's like arguing, is it a second degree or burn or is it a third degree burn? The point is you're still burnt. You know
Right.
what I mean? So
Exactly.
yeah. Um so one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and after we touched on Ron DeSantis and how he does not place a class analysis, and then he drives on hate, is the arguments for class analysis from a Marxist perspective or from a left perspective or a socialist perspective. How you can argue conservative ideas from the side of workers owning and running the government. And so I would like to share a video that I shared a few days ago. Um, it got it got some traction, but I would like to just um, show this again. Let me enlarge this. Okay. So my original tweet, I said proof that when you talk about issues from a layman's perspective, people will agree with you, even if they claim to be conservative, because it's a class issue. Many of us should take a lesson from this. And it was originally shared on Twitter to me by SLC Socialist, but it was originally created by Walter Masterson. So shout out to you, Walter
Oh, I know
Masterson.
Walter.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you saw this. Have you seen this?
I have not seen this video.
Okay. So I think you'll get a kick out of it. But
Awesome.
let's watch and I'll meet you on the other side.
Okay.
A lot of people here are very fed up and they're ready to collectivize. And in order to stop the communist agenda, we need to get rid of the big banks.
Right.
Karl Marx, um, no one knew who he was until the big banks distributed
Right.
all of his literature.
Right. Right.
So in order to get rid of communism, we need to get rid of the big banks.
Yeah.
Get rid of big pharma.
Right.
What else? Big tech.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like
Like these landlords that are coming in and buying hundreds of properties. You don't even know what
Like China is doing it, and Bill Gates.
Zillow.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people here are very fed up and they're ready to collectivize and sort of seize the means of production.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's why I support unions so much.
Well, it's funny. I work for actually not this shirt, the other shirt I had an earlier, for a company not too far from here called Liberty Pump. non-union, they let the owners of the company sold a third of the company to the employees. So the employees have ownership of it, which is a lot better. And
Well, they're collectivizing.
it's an ESOP.
Yeah, the workers own the means of
And then
production.
their families work there, their dad, the sons work there. And that's typically where America started. A lot of families did that.
Wow.
So your thoughts?
That is incredible. I mean, it's literally like I had that exact conversation with a Trump guy at the bar last night. He's a teacher and his dad's a farmer. And I was telling him about the World Economic Forum and, the big banks basically who run the world and are now causing the farmer strikes that we've seen in the Netherlands and that we've seen in India by trying to like decrease agricultural production and all these various things. But what the media then does is they project it all onto China. They say everything that the American banks and the American capitalists are doing is actually China. So my friend last night, he was convinced that China was buying up all his dad's farmland and pushing the farmers out, which is what I've been telling him the U.S. banks are going to do for the last 5 years. But I mean, by knowing, like, all I did was pulled up a map of all the farmland that's owned by Bill Gates. And I'm like, look, the U.S. is trying to totally decouple our economy from China. They are trying to completely isolate China and stop trade with them completely, no matter how much it hurts technological innovation and how much it hurts American citizens. Because to the imperialists, it's better to just threaten China. And that's their main priority. But if you can, and this goes back to anti-imperialism being an essential part of socialism in the modern era. If you can explain, no, it's the World Economic Forum and these giant American banks or banks in Wall Street and banks in London who are purposefully hurting our own citizens to hang on to their wealth and hang on to their empire. And they're the ones buying up all this farmland, and then they just say, oh, China's doing it. But if you argue from a class perspective, right, without using the word communism, basically, like Walter Masterson was doing there, like last night at the bar, I had all my friends were like freaking out. They're like, communism makes so much sense. We just need to name it something different. Like, and how do we organize against the current system? And these are conservative people. So like if they work, they know the system's organized irrationally. They know that they're getting screwed and exploited at their job. They're just scared of China. They're scared of communism, but they don't have any evidence or reasoning behind these ideas. So if you can deconstruct it for them, in my experience, it's gone very similar to that Walter Masterson video, where you can basically get Trump people agreeing with communism.
Yeah, it's crazy because, okay, my analogy, it's a little bit gross, but it makes sense. So, these corporations basically screwing over the American people and then blaming it on China is the equivalent of you farting and blaming it on a dog. Like, why are you doing that? Like, it's not the dog. Stop blaming it on the dog because he who smelt it dealt it, right?
Right.
So the corporations are the ones smelt it. They smelt their own shit, and now they're like, "Oh well, it's the dog's fault. It's the Chinese's fault." And I'm like, "No, it's y'all fault because you guys are the ones who actually dealt it. You dealt the austerity. You dealt the homelessness. You dealt the climate crisis. You dealt the lack of education opportunities in this country. You dealt the wars in the military-industrial complex. He who smelt it dealt it, and that's what's going on. And a lot of times people don't realize it because they're like that little kid that looks at their dad and then looks at the dog, and then the dad blames the fart on the dog, even though the dad's the one that farted. And the kids go, "Ew, Sparky, you stink." But actually, it's like, no, your daddy's the one that stinks because he's the one that did it. I know the analogy, but I hope it worked.
It does. No, it's exactly right. And it's just, I mean, and it's the same people, like these Wall Street and London bankers and financial capitalists who want war with China. And even Noam Chomsky, who's not pro-China, who's an anarchist, was saying the other day, like, China's driving the U.S. crazy. They're just playing the long game. They're investing, developing, which is combating everything that you just said. All the neoliberalism, all the austerity, all the isolation of the U.S.'s enemies, the so-called axis of evil around the globe. China's combating that just by investing, developing. And as the U.S. realizes there's nothing they can do about it, they're melting down, and it's causing internal effects here. And part of that melting down is just blaming everything that results from austerity, all the decreased living conditions and the increased cost of living, hyperinflation, increased rent, all these things that American citizens are seeing. They're just constantly blaming on China, and then or blaming on Russia. Russia is part of that too. And then sending all our tax money to Ukraine in the form of weapons and basically unlimited funding as the country here continues to fall apart. So it's the perfect ploy for them to just blame it on the dog, as they continue to stink up the country themselves.
Yeah, basically. And so, one of the arguments that I think a lot of conservatives now have is that they'll talk about billionaires like Bill Gates and George Soros, and without realizing that there are also billionaires that are on their side that are just as bad. And then you also have, people who might be liberal who will blame billionaires like the Koch brothers or Leon Cooperman or other, billionaires that might sound like they're on the right. And then they'll blame them as the bad billionaires while they're praising Elon Musk.
Right.
And it's like, no, they're both bad. Like, they both are like good cop and bad cop. They're still both bad because they're both cops.
Right.
And they're still both out to get you. It's just they have different ways of doing it. And you actually did a TikTok explaining this, and I just want to share that with people because it was actually really good. Oh, I forgot. I didn't put that up. But you did share a TikTok talking about that, how, you have the Democratic side and the Republican side, and so I think talking about it from a Marxist perspective and basically saying, no, all of them are bad. So it kind of takes away that, oh, this person's a liberal, they're trying to defend for these billionaires. So that takes that away. And then on top of it, you're actually agreeing with them that there is a problem. And so you're saying that they've been lied to. And I think that's something that we need to get back to, is letting people who consider themselves to be on the right, letting them know that they were lied to.
Yes, and I think also acknowledging where they're correct. Like, some people will just totally dismiss anybody who has any positions that aren't in line with the left or with socialism or whatever. It's like, you got to meet people where they're at. And a lot of conservatives, they don't like George Soros and Bill Gates, but then, as you said, you can explain the Koch brothers and be like, no, you're both, it's the same thing. The Republicans and the Democrats both serve corporations. And I like what you said about liberals doing it too. There's this really good book by Jane Meyer, who's basically like a New York Times journalist, sort of like a social democrat or liberal. And it's called Dark Money. And she basically traces how the Koch brothers have created this giant octopus of funding for the Republican Party. And not just funding of campaigns and elections, although that is part of what they do, but establishing these NGOs and these charitable philanthropic organizations that allow the Koch brothers to fund all of the educational institutions in the country and influence them towards being right wing. And then the Kochs, say that that's charitable donations because they're donating to universities and they use it as a tax write-off. But Jane Meyer does such an incredible job analyzing how the Koch brothers have done this, but then she's just pretty much blind to the way that it's happened in the Democratic Party. She's basically saying if we can combat these Republican billionaires and implement, more rational liberal policies, then capitalism will be fixed and things will be better, and we won't have this sort of trickle down neoliberalism that's been implemented since Reagan Thatcher. It's like, no, that's what Biden and the Democrats want too. They are as big of trickle down supporters as well. So it's seeing both sides, and the way that, because they aren't exactly the same. There are divisions within the ruling class. There are differences between the Democrats and Republicans, but ultimately, they're two sides of the billionaire class. So whoever, either party you support, you're supporting the billionaire class in the end.
Yeah. There was a joke by the comedian Sinbad years ago. I can't remember if it was Son of a Preacher Man or it was Afros and Bell Bottoms. I forgot which comedy special, but he was talking about being punished by his father, and the difference in, like his mom would be like, his mother would be like, just wait till your father gets home, and basically, he was going to beat his behind, and um next thing you know, the father beats him senseless, not senseless, but spanks him, and and the mom basically brought it on that to happen, and she instigated it, but then afterwards, you know, she's kind of like, oh well, I'm sorry, and it's like I kind of looked like I kind of looked at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party like that. Like the Democratic Party actually will bring in, you know, the conditions for us to be beaten with that rod, so to speak, and then the Republican Party will be the ones that actually hold the rod and beat us with it.
Mm.
And then the Democratic Party will be like, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen," when you meant for it to happen every single time. And so it feels like the Democratic Party is always creating catalysts for the Republican Party to continuously do that ratchet effect that moves us over to the right. Whereas, if they truly were a party of the left, they would have been an actual opposition. And I think that's the thing that we don't see. We don't see an opposition. Or if we do see an opposition, that opposition is either suppressed severely or assassinated. At least the leaders are assassinated.
Yeah, I think that's such a good analogy, because I was talking about the years of trickle down economics, or the 40 years of trickle down that the UK and the US have seen since Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And usually we say, that's where neoliberalism began. But what followed Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan? It was Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, who were, super far right neoliberal Democrats, more neoliberal, more pro corporate, more pro war than the Democrats had ever been, or the Labour Party in the UK, by a long shot. Which then, is followed up by people like George W. Bush, and it's followed up with right wingers who come in with the rod and do these horrific policies, or Bush did the Iraq War, the crime of the 21st century. But those conditions were created by the Democrats. And, the Bill Clinton also signed NAFTA into law, this free trade agreement that's allowed for open the door for all sorts of U.S. imperialism, and basically using financial institutions to try and keep Latin America in poverty and keep them under the boot of the U.S. so that our corporations can exploit them. So they work hand in hand. And, it's fair to say that neoliberalism began with Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, because, they did implement tons and tons of austerity. But Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, who followed, the supposed left-wingers, made things worse in their own way. And as you said, opened the door for then, some terrible right-wing presidents or leaders to come in and make things even worse from there. So now we've seen, that for 40 years, where we just trade off between Republican, Democrat, and things continually get worse for working people on the ground. And now I think at this point, people are looking for an answer outside those two parties more than they were in the past. But
yeah. And so, like one of the things that I like to argue, I keep saying argue, but like to demonstrate to people who might be on that more conservative side of the spectrum is basically saying things because a lot of times they focus on family, right? And so the argument I always make is, well, it's obviously that you want to spend more time with your family, right? Wouldn't it be best if you actually had a democratic say in the workplace and then you actually made the surplus labor from the work that you do? And then you can actually make a living wage so that you can spend more time at home with your family. And so then when you put it that way, then you know, it's like opening your eyes you know, and it kind of takes away that status of, temporarily embarrassed millionaire. It's like, no, 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 no. You're not a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. You're an overexploited worker. And the old people who overexploit you, some will be on your side of the political spectrum too. And they don't care about you. And so, what do you think about that particular argument?
Absolutely. I think what you said about the family is perfect. And I mean, here, I guess I can give a little criticism of the
Sure.
American left,
Mhm.
like Verso, I think it was, or maybe it was Haymarket Books. I don't know. I don't want to actually say who it was because I don't remember, but some left-wing book publisher, they published one day like abolish the family, and that was they were running on abolishing the family. And it's like, okay, I get what you're saying. I like, under socialism or communism, we do want, I mean, it's likely that children will be more communally raised, years and years down the line. If we're talking theoretically, like Engels wrote about this in his book, Family, Private Property, and the State, how the family changes with different economic systems. So, a family unit might look a little different under socialism. That doesn't mean, though, that we should, in this current stage of capitalism where working people think the family is super, super, super important, and the family is the economic unit of capitalism, as Marx and Engels say. There's nothing wrong with appealing to, quote unquote, family values. You want less time at work, so you can be home with your family. You want more vacation time. You don't want to be trapped in debt, so you're stressed out when you're at home. Other things like this. You want maternal and paternal leave, which the U.S. has neither by law.
Mhm.
It's okay to organize and unify people around these issues. Just because theoretically, we think that the family unit changes based on the mode of production that we're in, that doesn't mean we have to run on abolishing the family. We can unite people around things that are important to them.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. But I agree with meeting people where they're at. I mean, obviously not. You're going to meet conservative people who say like bigoted things, and that's not what I'm talking about. In meeting them where they're at, but like almost every conservative person, like you said, they care a lot about spending time with their family. So that's something to unify people around. That's something to unite and struggle around, um, rather than to just hate on that and throw crap at it and say, abolish the family.
Yeah, of course. And the thing is that, I mean, sometimes it's more of a semantics issue, because to me, it's like under, my ideology, it would be to grow the family, meaning, make it from a family into almost like a tribe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not in the same vein as tribalism like we have in this country, but actually having a true community where it's not just only it ran by a mom and dad. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
it's like, and a lot of people always, go back to the olden days, where, you had, the neighborhood, you had grandma, you had uncles, you had this neighbor who also looked out for you down the street. You had this neighbor who, if you did something wrong, then, you would also have to basically get punished from the neighbor as well as your mama and your daddy. So the thing is that there was this, it basically goes to the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And that's basically where a lot of us, go, but at the same time, we also recognize that not every single family looks exactly alike too. Some of us may end up having two moms or two dads. Some of us may end up having to be raised, with grandma and uncle and auntie and stuff like that. And not every family will look the same, but it reinforces that communal aspect of us, coming together in order to have a well functioning society. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I love what you guys do in building that community, and like at one of the mutual aid things that RBN was doing, I saw they were giving out diapers. And that's
Yeah,
like exactly what we're talking about, and building that community where it's like, okay, you can't afford diapers, well, the community will take care of you,
yeah,
the socialists
yeah,
will take care of you.
yeah,
And that's how you build that community, by meeting people's needs, and that's how you help show them that you care about the same things they care about. You care about supporting their family, not just yelling at them to abolish their family.
hmm
I don't know. I love what you guys are doing with that community, and yeah, I think that's the perfect way to organize people on those family issues. Um, yeah.
yeah. It's basically saying that we're going to help you in places and in areas where the government has failed to do.
Yes.
And so if we're doing it through this way, then you know we could, you know, by as the workers, as the people, especially the poor people, we could force the government to work in the way that we're working instead of through the way the elites have been doing it.
Right. Right. And create real, like that's Lenin's State and Revolution is a good book. And some people get the wrong idea and think that socialism or communism is the workers just kind of taking power of the government as it currently exists. So then we
Mhm.
have, a NATO that's run by workers rather than a NATO run by corporations. But the idea is that you smash the existing apparatus of the state, which has been built to suppress workers and invade other countries and suppress economic development, and accumulate wealth at the top. Like that's what our current government is
Yeah.
designed to do.
Mhm.
Smashing that and creating systems of worker democracy, creating a real government system that works for the people, a government that provides things like daycare, a
Yeah.
government that provides basic necessities that you need when you have children, a government that will force your employers to give you paternal leave or maternal leave by law. A new government apparatus is what we want to build, but that seems impossible until you're actually building that community on the ground, like what the Black Panthers did, and like what you guys are doing. Until you start building that community and really seeing people come together and
Mhm.
cooperate and
Yeah.
organize, then you see what's possible. Then you see how we really can take care of each other as a community, and build this sort of cooperative spirit,
Mhm.
and almost helps you see how a new world, less
Mhm.
competitive, selfish, individualistic world is possible. But
Mhm.
it's only something that can be done through organizing and action, which we're big
Yeah.
on education too, because education is important. But
Mhm.
actually getting on the ground and doing the work and building that community,
Yeah.
is the number one thing to showing people how another world is possible.
Yeah. And even like a lot of times you'll have a lot of conservatives that they'll push back on the whole climate change argument. And I've been thinking about it a little bit about the climate change argument. And really, you can even argue, you know, to fight climate change from a conservative mindset. And like for instance, you can go, you like hunting and fishing? Oh yeah? What do you hunt? What do you fish? And then they ask you and they answer. So I think that you've noticed that there's some changes in your hunting and fishing over the years, especially when it comes to hunting the game and the fish and things like that, right? Oh yeah. Well, that could also be an environmental thing. Let's say, just hypothetically, you don't believe in climate change at all. Would it be so bad to continue to preserve that way of life for hunting and fishing for you and your families to continue to do in the future? Would it be so bad if we tried to keep that, to preserve that as much as possible? I mean, you're a conservative, so you would, like to appeal to conservative principles like that of Teddy Roosevelt, right? he was a conservationist, right? He helped build the trees and the national parks. You want to preserve that. So let so why are we, constantly building all these roads that could make it worse for our ability to be able to do these things? Instead, why don't we just have more mass public transit so that we could, keep our environment as healthy as possible so that you continue to hunt and fish the way you've always did, just like your father and your grandfather and your grand and great grandfather did for years in the past.
Absolutely. That's a great place to appeal to people, especially like in the Midwest. Everybody pretty much hunts and fishes, and it's
Yeah.
important. I've had that conversation with some people who, are maybe right leaning or not super into politics, but they're like, why are we
Hmm.
building, luxury housing on hunting land or fishing land or places that need to be conserved? And I
Yeah.
think you can argue that, and you can argue against liberal environmentalism, because liberal environmentalism, as opposed to eco-socialism or ecological socialism, is all
Hmm.
about, well, let's just deindustrialize, and we'll all start using cardboard straws, and through personal responsibility we'll fight climate change, even though 70% of emissions are by a handful of corporations.
Yeah.
And you can argue against that and be like, we don't want deindustrialization. We don't want to take your farm away. We don't want to take your nature preserve away. We want to conserve these things and actually develop these things and make them better and protect them.
Hmm.
Versus the liberal environmentalists, their plan to combat climate change is individualistic, and it is based around, deindustrialization, and we'll just produce less. And that's what Fox News like fear mongers about with climate change, like, oh, the liberals are coming for your straws, and they're going to shut down all the farms, and they're going to shut down every oil rig. And that's not what eco-socialism is. Eco-socialism is about producing enough for everybody, in a way that's harmonious with the environment, and protecting our environment. And everybody
Hmm.
can get down with that. But sometimes in meeting conservative people where you're at, you can be like, yes, you are right. The liberals are doing this, which is wrong, and I disagree with it. But, here's the real solution. It's not voting for the Republican Party. It's not voting for Donald Trump. It's organizing a real movement based on class, and a real movement based on real environmentalism and eco-socialism, rather than this individualistic liberal environmentalism.
Yeah. And so I think that, and then on top of it, you can, it's kind of funny because when you talk to people who are more conservative minded, they will talk about the endless wars, right? They'll talk about we're
Hmm.
sick and tired of sending our kids abroad. And my thing is that it's like, okay, you're tired of sending our young people abroad to fight in these endless wars. And yet, when a conservative president does it, you guys suddenly hark on, oh, we got to fight terrorism. But you guys never asked who created the terrorists. It's not some religion that created terrorists. Because let me ask you this: if a nation bombed your people, and you're innocently just going to a wedding or going to a hospital or taking kids on a field trip, and then you survive that, but all your family and friends are dead, aren't you going to have a vested interest in taking down that government that killed your family and friends and people? People are gonna be like, well, I mean, like say China actually came to us and did that. Wouldn't you have a vested interest in taking China down? But then if they started calling you terrorists, then how would you feel? But they were the ones that actually did that because they wanted your resources in this country. Now flip that, and you're in the United States, and they're doing that to their country just for the sake of getting resources so that they can extract it and use it for corporations. Can you really say that them being that they're terrorists when your country's literally doing the terrorizing? So let's be real. Let's just take them out of those countries, and let's actually build up our own country. You know, I mean, I would argue that to somebody who's conservative because Why are we sending our kids to be part of cannon fodder for the military industrial complex?
Right. And a lot of those conservatives are now like, I mean, definitely more so than American liberals, are critical of all the money that Joe Biden's been funneling to Ukraine. And it's
Hmm.
interesting because, you know, you have liberals who are like denying that the Azov battalion and these other groups are even extremist groups. They're like, no, they're not far right. You know, they kicked all the neo-Nazis out as soon as the U.S. started giving them weapons. Now they're good guys, you know. The
Hmm.
liberals are arguing that, whereas conservatives are skeptical about it. So it is a good time to point to them, be like, look at what the U.S. has done abroad, you know. Look at what they did in the war on terror. So as you said, when
Hmm.
you take out the leadership of a country, it creates a power vacuum where then somebody is going to fight to fill that leadership void that's been created. So
Yeah.
that creates more extremist groups who
Yeah.
fight in that vacuum. That's what happened in Iraq. It's what happened in Afghanistan. It's what happened in Libya. It's what
Hmm.
happened in Syria. And not only that, but the country we invaded, Afghanistan, we invaded them to fight the terrorist groups who in the 80s we were literally funding and arming. We gave all our support to Osama bin Laden's Mujahideen. The Mujahideens, because they were fighting the Soviet Union, the Mujahideen splintered into Al Qaeda, and the ETIM, this group in that's caused a lot of trouble in the Xinjiang region in China, including
Hmm.
many massacres. And the U.S. actually took the ETIM off their terrorist listing a while back to help them recruit and to help them get funding and to help them get arms because the U.S. thinks it will destabilize China. Libya and Syria, the U.S. found every extremist group and rebel group in the region and created these opposition coalitions, which are basically just groups created by the U.S. Of a bunch of random extremists who, like in Libya, they didn't have any plan after they overthrew the government. It was just overthrow the government. And the country is just torn apart by civil war to this day, and was a country under Gaddafi that had one of the highest standards of living in all of Africa.
Hmm.
So not only is the U.S. creating these terrorist groups via destabilizing governments and creating a power vacuum, but they're directly funding these groups and then telling us we need to invade these countries to fight the same groups we funded. So it's totally absurd. And you're right. They use Islamophobia and xenophobia to justify these interventions to conservatives. Like, oh, we got to go get them. They have this religion that makes them all terrorists. But like you said, you can break it down for people and show them. No, it's not just the religion of Islam that creates a lot of terrorists. It's power vacuums, it's material conditions, it's U.S. intervention. It's the U.S. literally just giving $50 million in weapons to a terrorist group because they're fighting someone the U.S. doesn't like. Um, there's all these different factors, but what it comes down to is, we should be investing in our own people. We should be
Yeah.
investing here at home. We should be investing in construction. All of this money that's being sent abroad. We don't even take care of the soldiers when they come home with PTSD, right?
Hmm.
I've got a couple friends who were sent overseas to fight in Afghanistan. They came back and the military's like, all right, thanks for your service, and that's it. The military just cuts ties with them. Doesn't matter if they have PTSD, doesn't matter if they were injured. And there are some services available through the military, but they're hard to access and you need to find them yourself. There's nobody there to help you through it, help
Hmm.
you access these programs because they don't want to pay for the vets. They don't want to spend any money actually helping the vets. That's money that could be going to arm Nazis in Ukraine.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a good thing to point out. And there's so many families now and so many people who know folks who were sent overseas to guard the oil fields in Syria or sent to Afghanistan. They see it's bullshit. They see that there's no real enemy we're fighting there. We're just making money for the military industrial complex. And these people
Hmm.
aren't naive. So yeah, that's also a great way to organize conservatives, especially today when you have so many conservatives who are skeptical about Joe Biden's foreign policy.
Yeah, and as far as our troops are concerned, and it's like I said this before on this channel, where the best way to support the troops is to not send them to be in harm's way for needless resources like oil and opium.
Right.
And so I'd rather support the troops by taking them out of these wars and out of these countries, closing those 800 some odd military bases down, taking the rifles out of the troops' hands and handing them a shovel and having them plant trees, having the Army Corps of Engineers actually build up some, renewable energy systems in our country, and instead of fighting a war of terror, we're fighting the war of climate change and using them, and the best part is you're not going to get PTSD from planting a tree. You're not going to, if you're doing it safely, you're not going to lose limbs. You're not going to have nightmares over building systems that harness geothermal and solar and wind power. You're not going to get that because you're literally doing something for the planet and not killing other people. You're actually helping to preserve life without having to end life to do it. And so this is some of the things that I talk about that it would be best, and because the era of imperialism needs to have been over a long time ago, because it's not necessary at all.
No, mutual development and cooperation can bring us so much further. And all imperialism does is stop the world from developing. Stop the
Mhm.
world from developing so a small group of people in Wall Street and London can continue to accumulate massive wealth and, do their best to enslave half the world.
Mhm.
And it's totally counterintuitive and against the interests of the vast majority of Americans and the vast majority of people on Earth. And I know, not everybody's a China expert, and there's a lot of BS about China in the media. But the PLA, the People's Liberation Army in China, has planted a forest now the size of Ireland to
Oh
combat
wow.
deforestation. Yeah, and Mao is constantly writing in Mao's quotes as they're forming these people's militias and as they're forming the PLA to struggle for communism and to struggle against the colonizers. After they take power, the PLA's job becomes construction. And as you said, technicians helping people to develop infrastructure, helping
Mhm.
people combat natural disasters, helping people set up these agricultural facilities. And that's what the Army's done ever since. And their goals and their jobs have changed. Like I said, now they're planting a forest to help protect the ecology and combat climate change, versus back then they were helping produce industry and helping China produce more. But I mean, how much more constructive is that than what the U.S. military does around the world? And
Mhm.
destroying infrastructure and destroying technology and preventing places from developing, destroying the ecology and the environment. Like, look what we did in Vietnam with dropping tons and tons of Agent Orange and napalm on the country, preventing them from being able to develop themselves, especially agriculturally, and feed their people. So that's what imperialism does, and that's why Danny Haiphong, who's really great, says China builds the U.S. bombs, because that's basically what it is. Our military bombs and destroys, and they've changed their military to build. That's what a socialist military should be. Like you said, this era of imperialism needs to come to an end. Like, it's so obvious. It is
Mhm.
so obvious that the U.S. military is acting destructively,
Yeah.
and it would be better if they were invested in construction rather than destruction. But it's just
Yeah.
taking power from, organizing people and finding a way to take power from the oligarchy who runs our country, um, so that we can do something like that. And I did want to say too, Ian Angus, who's a Marxist ecologist, has a really good book called Facing the Anthropocene. And he basically calls for a full transformation of all U.S. military personnel into like climate corps, and like
Ooh.
rescue corps to help natural disasters, help with construction, plant trees. And it's just like, that would be so much better.
What was the name of the book again?
Facing the Anthropocene by Ian Angus. And I have buddies who are in the military because so many of my friends joined the military to pay for college, so they could
Mhm.
wrestle, and compete at the college level. And I tell them about this. I'm like, this is what China's military is doing. Like, wouldn't you rather be helping people in the community and planting trees? Like, that would be amazing. All we do is sit in the barracks and waste taxpayer money, basically.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That was an interesting book recommendation. Let's do this. Let's bam. There we go.
Yeah.
So this is the book that you were talking about, Fossil Capitalism and the Crisis of the Earth System. Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a great text. Ian Angus is an ecologist, and it's forwarded by John Bellamy Foster, who's done some of the best Marxist ecology in the modern era. But what Angus kind of does is sort of goes back to the original, like goes back to the Marxist roots. And he talks about how in chapter 3 of Marx's Capital, Marx is already, in the 1800s, seeing this metabolic rift that capitalist production creates in nature, where nature has these natural recycling processes where it recycles its chemicals and leads to growth and sustainability. And human overproduction and capitalist production are starting to get in the way of some of those natural processes and cycles of the earth. So now this has been playing out for years, and it's had various effects on the ecology that we can analyze today. But it's something Marx was looking at, 200 years ago, which is, or maybe not 200 years, but over 100 years ago, which is very interesting.
Okay, cool. There's also another video that I wanted to show, and because this has been a bit of a contention on the left, which is kind of depressing because I feel like if you could argue this from a Marxist perspective and get people to come to your side, uh, in an authentic way, it's like, why not? And I'm talking about the FBI, right? Because a lot of people were, a lot of people who were on the right, especially who were Trump supporters, were up in arms over what the FBI, stated about, they did to Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. And this is a great TikTok that you did that I would just like to show people. And then we can expand on it a little further if that's okay with you.
For sure.
All right, let's go.
Sorry, I tried to answer the same question last night, but I realized I was too tired and my brain was broken. But now I'll give you an answer. What is your opinion on the FBI discourse going around? Should we welcome the anti-FBI stance from the right, even if it's ultimately disingenuous? Of course, in reference to the conservatives and Republicans who are upset about the FBI raiding Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago, as well as the prosecution of Alex Jones and the people at Project Veritas. I would say it's definitely a good thing that we should capitalize on, and ultimately I don't think their anti-FBI stance is disingenuous. I think they are genuinely upset with the FBI. They just don't see the FBI for what it is theoretically, which is what it really is, which is an armed body of the state which acts as a tool of suppression over one class by another. The FBI has always been one of these armed bodies with a monopoly on violence who suppresses revolutions and uprisings at the behest of the ruling capitalist class. And this is what we need to be telling the workers and the masses who are mad at the FBI right now. I think that's more strategic than being like, you rah rah, the FBI is good now. They're going after someone I dislike. We need to take a less individualistic and more theoretical and scientific analysis of these things. And it's difficult to put personal resentments aside, trust me. During the Bernie campaign, Project Veritas was going undercover and spying on people within the campaign and secretly recording them while trying to get them to say something that outed them as a Marxist or a communist. They would then blast these videos over the internet and try to demonize the Bernie campaign as well as the campaign staff. So you'll never find me saying Project Veritas is good. But if, say, some of my coworkers or some working people in my community are mad at the FBI because the FBI is cracking down on an organization like Project Veritas, I'm going to be like, okay, let me tell you about Fred Hampton. Let me tell you about how the FBI and the CIA and the police work at a systemic level. And if they can't be won over by scientific analysis and truth, then move on to the next one. Or continue making the argument until one day it sinks in. That's usually how it works. People don't change their views all at once, but they do change.
I forgot about that TikTok. I'm proud of that one.
Yeah,
I forget. Oh, you can go ahead. Were you gonna say something?
No. Please go ahead.
Yeah, like one of the things I forgot to say when I was talking about the great work that you guys have been doing is you call out that like individualism, this idea of, sort of like we were talking about before the stream, this tendency on the left to be condescending. And, like everybody except me is just dumb. If you have these certain politics, or if you maybe voted for Trump or whatever, I won't even talk to you. I'm just going to write you off as a basket of deplorables or whatever else. Like, you guys are always calling that out. You're always calling out, that liberal individualism and that sort of when it's used to distract from class politics. And that's what I saw happening a lot with the Trump thing, where you had all these people in America who were mad at the FBI, and a creator named Yongju, who's a rapper from Taiwan, who I really, really like. He was saying basically what you and I are saying, like, we need to ride this energy. We need to look at how people are mad about the FBI, point to all the terrible things the FBI has done, and try and organize them against it. And who cares? I don't like Project Veritas. I don't like Trump, but I don't care why these people are mad about the FBI. I just want them to understand that the FBI is a tool of class suppression that stops us from liberating ourselves and, murdered Fred Hampton, one of the greatest organizers of all time. So I think we have to look at these things collectively and look at these things in terms of a collective class struggle, rather than just thinking about it as, oh, those people voted Republican, therefore I don't care if they're criticizing the FBI, they're pieces of shit anyways. Because people do change. They seriously do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because I feel like if you have people, and I'm not talking about the Marjorie Taylor Greens, I'm talking about the people who think that she's an honest actor, right? I want to call to these people and say, okay, you're upset that the FBI raided Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago. Okay, I get it. Let me tell you what else the FBI has done. Did you know that a week before the FBI raided Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago, they actually raided the offices of the Uhuru Group, who are the African People's Socialist Party, and they accused them of being Russian assets, even though they have nothing to do with Russia? Can I also let you know that they also assassinated Fred Hampton at the age of 21 while he was still in his bed in Chicago? Or that the fact that they also sent a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. urging him to self-harm. I'm going to choose my words carefully on YouTube, but basically to off himself. So yeah, the FBI actually did that. J. Edgar Hoover was very instrumental in taking down people who had dissenting thoughts against a capitalist system. So if you want to go up against the FBI, if you want to talk about, abolishing the FBI, I agree with you. I agree with you. I just also want you to know this is also all the transgressions that the FBI has done against a lot of groups that have tried to liberate ourselves against this capitalist system. And I may not say capitalist system, but I may say against people who are, champions for workers or something like that. But the thing is that strike while the iron is hot. Like, that's what I mean, like, and here's the thing. Here's the funny thing. A lot of people be like, oh man, these MAGA people, they're not trusting of our institutions like the FBI. They're so right wing, when the Black community has been against these systems forever. We don't trust them because we know what they did to Fred Hampton. We know what they did to Malcolm X. We know what they did to MLK. We know what they did. And then we know exactly what they did to the Black Panthers. We watched. And then every single time we tried to actually mobilize, next thing you know, who was bashing our heads in? The FBI and the local law enforcement authorities. And so, as Black people, how much do we trust them? We're like, we don't trust them for shit. Like, look, boom, right here. This dude was jailed, and he was murdered in prison for that type of stuff. So guess what? Are we trusting of him? No. And now we're not going to bash you for coming to the correct position. We're going to enlighten you on why you should be more solidified in this position, and also you should take that thin blue line flag out of your off your house, and you should be ones that go, you know what? They're all in league together. That don't tread on me flag you have, those same people with the thin blue line, they're treading on us. So guess what? They're not good for you either.
And that's exactly why the black community's been the vanguard of the class struggle in the U.S. and why the CIA and FBI put so much effort into dismantling. And I saw a tweet the other day that said, like, we've had several Lenin type figures in the U.S. and they've been killed by the CIA and FBI. Like, at first I'm like, that might be an exaggeration. Then I thought about Fred Hampton, being killed at only 20 and the level that he had organized in only a year. Like, he might have been very well been, a Lenin type figure who organized the masses, but they cracked down on him. And yeah, it's good to show people that. And you made a good point too. We're not trying to convince Marjorie Taylor Greene to be a socialist. She who she is. She's a grifter. We're talking about people who think she's an honest actor, who work 10 hours a day and, don't really pay attention to politics other than maybe watching 30 minutes of Fox News. And, you can kind of deconstruct their whole worldview for them or as you said, strike while the iron is hot and say, okay, you don't like the FBI. You're catching on to that. Here's what the FBI has done historically to stop class organizing and mass organizing. So yeah, it's not us saying, we're going to convince Republican politicians. We know they're corrupt. We know they serve corporations. We're talking about people who maybe consider themselves conservative or Republican, but are really just working people and are sort of confused, looking at the political circus from their position.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically taking that cynical view and expanding upon it to make it something that's very solid and genuine. And then it's like, okay, so if they're doing that to people like us, then we must be doing something right, right?
Right.
And then you get to a point where it's like, okay, so if we're trying to encourage workers owning their workplaces and having a democratic say over what happens in their workplaces, why are they actually tearing us down? And on whom's behalf are they tearing us down? And then that's when some people who might consider themselves conservative will go, well, wait a minute. I guess we should fight with you against these things. And then it gets to a point where they may have to march alongside somebody who's trans or somebody who's queer like me. And then they find out, oh man, these billionaires, they were just lying to us about you guys, making us feel like you guys were actually a threat when really you guys were never the threat. Undocumented immigrants were never the threat. Queer people were never the threat. Black people were never the threat. The oligarchs are the threat. And so that's what they're afraid of. Because just like with Fred Hampton, I think it was Bobby Lee, who's part of the Black Panther Party. Bobby Lee was actually talking to a lot of white people in one meeting that CJ, he showed a few times. And then you talk about the Black Panthers that teamed up with the Young Patriots and the Young Lords. Well, what was happening? Well, that was the Rainbow Coalition, which freaked the government out. It freaked the corporations out because it really meant a class unity, a class solidarity in order to change the system, the economic system, into something that actually benefits the poor people and the workers.
Exactly. It's because the struggle is the same. As you said, there is, no difference or no reason for different identity groups or people of different sexualities or people of different races or whatever they try and divide us by. There's no reason for them to fight. We're actually not divided by these. Anybody can get along, and you can teach people this by exposing them to and having them spend time and organize with, like you said, people of an identity group that they don't understand. And through unifying by class, which is material, which is real, which is a real division in society. There is an owning class, which is different, and exploiting the working class, the working mass, the vast majority of society. And that materially ties us together, right? That is something that we can unify everyone around just by pointing out, the corrupt healthcare system or the endless wars or whatever else. That struggling together in a unified mass is good for our own interests, versus staying divided over things that like you said don't matter. And I think also you make a good point that in getting people to organize together, you kind of break down their prejudices and you allow them to be exposed to people that they maybe normally wouldn't, which helps them overcome some of these things, some of these backward ideas. And the best thing I think you said is showing people who have a general sort of distaste or disgust towards the FBI and the institutions of the state right now, these armed bodies of the state, making that concrete, making it theoretical, making it scientific, saying, okay, you have this general feeling. This is exactly how the FBI and the police and all those folks operate. And make it, showing them how it works on a theoretical level a little bit, and helping them solidify their anti-FBI opinion. And then more specifically too, there's such a big problem with working people just like loving the police, white working people, I should say, and putting those thin blue line flags up. And there's work to be done in showing people that no, the police are an armed body of the state meant to suppress you and to take your money and to keep the prison industrial complex making a lot of money. So yeah, this, I think also the anger towards the FBI could be an opportunity to say, okay, you're angry at the FBI, but the CIA works this way too. The police work this way too. Point out all these different armed bodies of the state who have suppressed the masses for so long.
Yeah. And so this is why, I'll also say that, poor white people, they're coming after you in your hoods too. So, and for the sake of profit, the sake of keeping, you at bay, for the sake of the oligarchs. And so, I think this is one of the reasons why, and just to address something, when I say conservative, I'm not talking about the ultra racist people who actually don't want me to actually live. That's not what I'm talking about. Number one, let's get one thing straight. Racists don't want to work with me. Not my fluffy, disabled queer ass. They don't want to work with me, and I don't want to work with them. So it will never happen in the first place. So anybody talking about, oh, well, you're whitewashing conservatives, because yes, I see the chat. You're whitewashing conservatives. No, I'm not. Okay. What I'm saying is there are some that have many people that have been lied to. Just like a lot of people who are liberal are lied to. There are a lot of people who consider themselves conservative who are lied to. Because the capitalist class, they are both liberal and conservative, but they have this class solidarity, right? And so the thing is that that's who it is. And so for us is to take that brainwashing and to basically change it out, to get rid of it. Because the thing is that they were been propagandized for years into thinking, oh, well, these billionaires, they got there because they earned it. Or I'm poor and homeless and it's my own fault because it's a moral failing and it's a personal failing, when really it's the system that put them there in the first place. Or police shot that person in the back even though they were unarmed. Even if they were armed and they had that gun legally, if they weren't, being dangerous and pointing at them, then guess what? They should have never gotten shot in the first place. So my thing is we're talking to people who have been lied to constantly and basically letting them know, look, this is the lie. Here's the receipts to prove it. And this is the way forward in order for you and me to have liberation. But we can only get that liberation if we do it collectively. And so that's what it is about. That's what this conversation between me and Eddie is about. And so there's a lot of people who may be trollish in the comments who are, for some odd reason, against, us actually having class solidarity. You can't achieve these things without class solidarity. It just won't happen. If you think that it can't happen without class solidarity, go to TYT, go to them, go to MSNBC, because guess what? That's what they're about. But we're about class solidarity and actually gaining these things. And insofar as getting class solidarity, what that means is you will have people who will unlearn some of these crazy ideologies that have been pushed on people through the capitalist class in order to divide us. That's what it is. And so RBN isn't here just for black people. RBN here is here for everybody so that we can teach everybody from our perspective what the real deal is so that we can actually move together and actually have a more egalitarian, equitable, and equal society that is not ran by a small group of sociopaths at the top.
And I mean, that was an amazing rant. Even just from a class solidarity perspective, like obviously we're not saying work with racists, but any racist ideas in the movement is anti-class solidarity. It's race essentialism, and it's everything we've been arguing against this whole time. Yes, we've been criticizing, liberals who maybe dismiss all Trump voters as a basket of deplorables and think you can't even talk to them. But we also, are criticizing race essentialism. This idea that, there needs to be war and fighting and division between people based on their identity. So that's an idea, this idea of class solidarity and this universal solidarity is an idea that's absolutely antithetical to racism. It's the ultimate debunk of racism, that people are not, who they are because of their identity, but they're who they are because of their material conditions and the way they act. And maybe your identity might make up, part of who you are. But that's nothing to allow to divide us. So, this idea of class solidarity is against racism. The Black Panthers, and trying to build the Rainbow Coalition, were fighting against racism because that's antithetical to solidarity and class solidarity.
Well, actually, to add to your point, because once the Black Panthers actually explained their position in regards to, because remember, the Young Patriots actually used to walk around with the Confederate flag. But then once they started talking to the Black Panthers and realized that that was basically antithetical to class solidarity, they stopped all that. And then the ones who wanted to keep hold of that ideology, they left the Young Patriots. They dipped out because they were like, yeah, I want to hold on to my prejudice and to my racism, so I'm going to dip out because you guys are changing. You guys are becoming more unified with the blacks. And so guess what? That's what happened. Absolutely. And there were some Black Panthers that actually left too. But the thing is that really it was about the class solidarity in order to achieve something greater. And the thing is that one thing is that we're realizing is that you can still have your identity and it should still be recognized. But to hate somebody for their identity is something that really is just gives more power to the elites, to the oppressive powers. So it's like, yes, please acknowledge me for who I am. Acknowledge me for my identity. But it's nothing to hate because I don't have power like that. They're the ones who have power like that. Don't punch down, punch up. That's my thing.
Yes, and our solidarity is in our class solidarity. And like you make a good point too. Like, what happens then if Fred Hampton just ignores the Patriots or ignores these people and doesn't form the Rainbow Coalition? Says, no, you're a basket of deplorables. We're not going to work with any of you. We're not going to try and educate you. We're not going to talk to any of you. Because your group carries the Confederate flag. Okay, then they're going to go get more. They're going to become more racist. They're going to, rather than being educated by the Black Panthers, educated in Marxism and socialism, they're going to go, in modern day, go listen to Tucker Carlson or whatever, or go listen to someone online, and they're going to go further down this like alt-right pipeline. Versus, if you educate people and you deconstruct their ideology, there's a chance to bring them out of that. But if you just say, nope, I'm not even going to look at those people, not even going to acknowledge that they exist, okay, then they're not going to have their worldview deconstructed, and it's going to get more bigoted. They're going to go hang out with other bigots. I mean, not that, I don't know. But, education is always best. And not that you have to put yourself in a dangerous situation is what I'm saying.
Of course.
Not that I'm saying any people should, go to a KKK meeting or whatever and risk your life. But most Trump people aren't like that. They aren't like I don't know. I shouldn't say most. I shouldn't make generalizations. But most working people you talk to aren't just gonna outright hate you for your identity. Unless I'm wrong about that. Maybe some do, but
Hmm. I mean, it's not. Yeah, there's some, but it's not all. You know what I mean?
right.
And
Yeah.
there are certain subsets of the population that you just can't change. And just like you said, and I just wanted to, answer this question. It says, I don't. He says, I don't know, JB. You're saying that you want to deprogram people that are deep in the machine. You're taking on a lot. That brainwashing is deep seated. And just like what you said, Eddie, earlier, is that this takes time, right? It takes time for us to be able to do this. And sometimes it's just planting a seed into someone's brain and saying, look, they're taking your power away, including the people who, you may be watching, these people on YouTube who are far on the right, but the thing is that they're not on your side either. And so as you continuously, maybe relay this information to them, you could help them move to that position, So, I mean, look, how did I get here to the left? It wasn't overnight, and it's just like there are some people who said that they were used to be conservative and now they call themselves openly a socialist. It happens. But the thing is that I think it's like what Michael Brooks said, the late Michael Brooks. He said, be kind to others, be kind to people, but be ruthless to institutions and um, and systems. So part of what helps is that kindness factor, and letting people know that number one, you care about them. Number two, you tell them the truth and you show them the receipts of why it's the truth. And then guess what? You lay that seed there. And sometimes people just won't, you know, some people just won't believe it overnight. And they may be skeptical, which is a good thing because you want people to have that skeptical mentality. But then once you convince them, then they're solidly with you. They're not fair weather. And then they'll start thinking, oh man, well, look, I used to think somebody like, the Koch brothers were cool because they were on my side, but no billionaire is good. And so then they move to the point of, well, we just need to have a ruling of the proletariat instead of ruling of these capitalist elites. So,
And I think it's such a good point. Carlos brings this up too. Like everyone in the chat right now who's a socialist didn't become a socialist overnight, pretty much. Most of us weren't red diaper babies, believing in communism, Marxism, and socialism since day one. It's a process, it's a process of development. You have to be convinced, and if we're just saying like 40% of the population or whatever voted for Trump, so we won't talk to any of those people at all, they're never going to be convinced. And I like to ask, like, what if someone did that to you? What if you're a socialist now today, and you used to be a liberal or a conservative or whatever, whoever it was that convinced you to be a socialist, what if they didn't do that? What if they just said, no, you have the wrong ideas, I'm not going to talk to you? You would never become a socialist, and you would never be organizing for a better world now. So it takes time and it takes patience. And people, like I was saying in that earlier TikTok, like people do change. But I coach wrestling, and one thing that I've noticed since I started, and I do it at a fairly high level, a college Division III level now, is you can tell a kid a million times sometimes. You tell them like, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and they don't do it. But then they hear it a different way or from a different voice from someone else, and then it clicks. Then they get it like that. Like, oh, and then, as a coach, like, why didn't you just listen to me when I said it? But it doesn't work like that. Humans are funny sometimes. So, planting those seeds is huge. And it does lead to change.
Yeah, and actually that was a perfect way of explaining it, because like for instance, those of you at Midwestern Marxist, there's different people who can explain something in a different way. Somebody like for here in RBN, I may not be able to get through to somebody, but CJ may be able to get through to somebody, or it might be Savvy that can get through to somebody better than me. And so we have to realize that just because we don't get through to somebody doesn't mean they still can't get through. It's just our key may not be the right key for that lock.
Right.
So
Exactly. But you might be planting the seeds, and someone else is going to come along and water those seeds, and then they'll sprout.
yeah,
You never know.
chia.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I mean, that's something I think that uh, that's one of the reasons why I encourage so many people to come into this space, especially on my channel. I encourage people to like look, if you have an opinion and you are anti-capitalist and you're anti-imperialist, get yourself, if you don't, if you like to write articles, get a Substack. If you want to just have your voice, then just do a podcast where people don't even see you. Or if you are comfortable being on camera, then shoot. You can have a phone and a decent internet connection. You can start your own YouTube channel just like that. And then start putting that out there. And here's the thing, what you may say, what you may put out there may actually, you know, touch the heart of somebody and touch the mind of somebody better than any one of us at RBN can, or anybody one of us at Midwestern Marks, or the Indie News Network, or Mi Casa Su Casa. You never know, because you may be able to think of it in a way that's so, different, but it makes sense to another person. And so this is why I encourage people, if you can, do that. And then also take that knowledge that you have acquired and then talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, even if they have some horrible views. Plant those seeds, because then you can turn an enemy into a friend, and then you can turn a friend into a comrade. And how much better is it to turn an enemy into a comrade than to keep them as your enemy?
Absolutely. I mean, that's an amazing way to put it. I couldn't agree more. I encourage our fans to make their own videos if they want to. I mean, there's a reason, or do whatever they can to reach out to people, but that's one way. And there's a reason, like Silicon Valley and the Democrats are cracking down on freedom of speech online. And
Yeah.
there's a reason our first TikTok account got permanently banned. It's because they don't want these ideas being spread. But as our friend Ramiro Sebastian Funes says, who does amazing YouTube videos about debunking the lies of imperialism, he's like, everybody has a movie studio basically now with
Yeah.
their phone. You can broadcast yourself. It's just using the most advanced means of communication at our disposal to organize for socialism. So yeah, couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah. I mean, you're literally using apparatuses that capitalists, it's funny when capitalists are like, oh, you're a socialist, but you're using an iPhone. It's like, yeah, we're literally using the tools that capitalists have made in order to create more capital, in order to bring it down. We're literally using your tools against you.
Capitalism
And
creates its own gravediggers, Karl Marx.
bam, there you go. See, this is why I love when I talk to people who read theory and then they apply that theory. Because guess what? It's like boom, boom. I love
Yep.
it.
It's awesome.
Yeah. If you don't mind my asking, what is some of your favorite books that you have read? Because I'm still new into reading theory, in this space. So I'm always a student. I will always be a student, but I'm kind of first grader right now. So whereas you're a senior in high school, you're getting into college, in this space. So what is some of the ones that you're like, oh man, this book was amazing and I recommend this to anybody and everybody?
I do have a YouTube video on like it's like a reading guide for when you're first starting out. And I think the first book I recommend is Black Shirts and Reds, kind of just to debunk to get an idea of what class analysis is, because he gives a class analysis or a Marxist analysis of World War II and the class politics and the economics. So learning that, and then also seeing that, you know, socialism really hasn't failed, you know, that's basically a lie, this idea that socialism has failed. So that one's good. And then for theory, I would honestly, I would start with Lenin, because this is more like Black Shirts and Reds is a Marxist history, but like explicit Marxist theory books I would start with are Lenin's State and Revolution, which is an incredible book. It explains how the government works. It explains how the government is basically a dictatorship of the capitalist class, which uses these armed bodies like the FBI, CIA, the cops, all these organizations and institutions we've been discussing today in depth, to suppress the working masses. You know, that's what these armed bodies are for. And they have a monopoly on violence. So, you know, cops can shoot people and get off free. They're the only institution in society that's allowed to use violence. So that's how they enforce this dictatorship of capital. That's a great book, and it talks about how we struggle for working class political power. And then Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. I got my degree in politics and studied geopolitics a lot. And I read this book after graduating, and it was, I don't know, it's like a 130-page book from 1917. And it was better and explained the world better than anything I had read in my 4 years of studying politics, you know, at the college level. Like, Lenin just sums it up so well. Like, it is these banks and these giant capitalists who merge, they control the government, and then they use the government to do violence to protect markets, control labor and resources overseas. So it explains how imperialism under capitalism is a stage of capitalism, that these capitalists are trying to export their capital and control markets and control labor. Now that capitalism has spread globally and exists pretty much everywhere, which is something that's happening, you know, while Lenin's alive, after Marx died. So yeah, I would start with Parenti and Lenin. It's kind of a long answer, but love books.
No, got you. Thank you so much for that. Because a lot of times, a lot of us, I said this before, I came to the left without reading theory. Why? Because I lived through the perils of capitalism, right? You know, being in poverty, still am. You know, being disabled, seeing how being a worker, it has basically suppressed us as workers. It really just living here radicalized me. And so now I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to read more and I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. This makes sense. And you're looking at it from a real world, objective historical analysis, right? And so I think that's one of the things that, you know, has happened for me. And so that's why I appreciate, you know, reading these as well.
Yeah, I mean, Lenin calls theory, Marxist theory, the experience of the entire working class of the world taken in general. So it's taking the exploitation and the, you know, all the effects of capitalism that working people feel on an everyday basis, and it's giving an analysis of that. It's giving an explanation of that. It's giving, you know, sort of a scientific outlook. Okay, this is why you feel alienation and exploitation, and why you are why 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, while all of our tax dollars are used to fund wars overseas. You know, working people intrinsically know these things, and they feel them, but oftentimes they don't know what to do with these feelings, you know, where to put their energy into organizing, and they don't necessarily understand how the system that they're in works. So, you know, I'd say most of us come to the left on our own, you know, just like you said, with our own feelings of feeling exploited and understanding the system sucks. But then reading theory just helps you understand it better. Like you said, like what was happening earlier, you were explaining explaining how capitalism creates its own gravediggers just based on your own experience, and explaining, how people can use their phones to communicate leftist ideas. And then I came with the Marxist quote, that explained exactly what you were saying. It's like theory just gives you that little oomph, that little, and it makes it you better at explaining things to people, and deconstructing things for people, including people with some backwards ideas like we've been talking about today. And it helps you understand your own plight better. So, it's not, some people get the wrong idea. It's not saying you need to read, you're a bad socialist unless you spend all your time reading, or you're not a real socialist. It's that reading these books will just make you a better organizer, right? It'll make you better at explaining things. It'll help you understand your own situation better. It's not saying, like, you don't feel exploitation without reading theory, or you're not a socialist if you don't read theory. Like, of course, theory is just putting analysis to the things that the working class feels and experiences. But it is helpful, especially if you're already a socialist, in developing your skills as an orator, or in conversation, or as an educator.
Well, yeah, and I kind of liken it to like your experiences within capitalism is like a piece of chicken. I mean, you can still eat the chicken and you can still get the flavor of the chicken, but then theory is like sprinkling a little bit of salt and pepper on that chicken. Next thing you know, it starts to wake that flavor up, and you're just like, oh, okay. So that's basically what it sounds like to me. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's a great explanation. I love that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to use that one.
Yeah. So, and that's, I think one of the reasons why I'm doing this. And one of the people there was a couple people who encouraged me to read theory. One of them was Nick, of RBN, shout out to you, Nick. And other was my friend Z. In fact, he's the one that recommended to me Blood in My Eye, by George Jackson. And then it was also Robert Durden, who's part of the Indie News Network. He was reading Black Shirts and Reds, and I was like, you know what? After hearing a speech, really it was I guess either a speech or a lecture by Parenti, uh, and so I was fascinated with what he was saying. So I was like, you know what? Well, I'm listening to him reading Black Shirts and Reds, so let me find something else. And well, unfortunately, the type of brain that I had, I saw the title "Dirty Truths," and I was like, "Ooh, let's read this." So I was like, "Okay." And so I picked it up, and next thing you know, I'm reading it, and I'm like, "Holy shit!" So and I'm
Yeah,
really enjoying it. So
it can be
it's
like
great.
exhilarating too. I remember when I was first reading Lenin, I was like, fuck yeah, like finally someone's freaking saying it. Like the
Yeah,
corporations just own the government. We got to get it back from them. Like we got to struggle and organize for it.
yeah,
And helping me understand things better, like the armed bodies of the state. So yeah, it can be really fun and enlightening. And I should mention too, we have a video explaining Black Shirts and Reds, or talking about it, on our channel, and then we have two like full reading guides of Imperialism and State and Rev. And those not only kind of give analysis of what Lenin's saying, but I also give like a summary in case people like struggle to sit down and read, so they can just kind of listen to it and get the gist of what the book's about. So little shameless self-promotion there, but I'm pretty proud of those videos because people have told me that they help them understand theory. So yeah, those are on our YouTube.
gotcha. Thank you so very much for that. Just to ask you another question. So, what is on the horizon? Is there any new projects that are coming along for Midwestern Marxists, or anything new that your viewers are looking forward to that you guys haven't done before?
We are currently working on our newest journal, which is a print project. Our last journal is right up there on my bookcase, as well as the last book we published. We're working on that. I'm writing a book now about U.S. imperialism in Venezuela. Hopefully that'll be done by the end of the year. So we got that coming up, and then we're also trying to organize a CPUSA club in my area, so we can do more mutual aid and do more of the stuff, basically directly inspired by you guys in RBN. I've
Cool.
got a handful of people who want to start doing some of that in my area. So yeah, that's what should be on the horizon. I'm excited.
You say you're a wrestling coach?
Yep. Yep.
Maybe you and Nick are both in the Midwest. Nick does MMA. I think there's some mutual aid, you know, grappling, classes and some MMA classes that can happen.
Yes.
Just in case, this revolution pops off sooner than we think.
Exactly. That's
I'm
an
just
awesome
saying,
idea.
you know, yeah,
I
I
saw
don't know.
someone saying earlier that I should have a boxing match with Nick. I don't want any of that. I am not a boxer. I'll get knocked out.
No, 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 no. Actually, a class with you and Nick, actually, you teaching him grappling, and then he teaches you boxing. I would actually watch that. I think that actually be pretty cool.
That would be sweet. Yeah. We should
Yeah,
do that.
yeah. And as a socialist, and people are gonna look at me like I'm crazy for this. Some people who are especially are new to this. But I also think that if you are on the left, especially if you're in a disenfranchised group, by disenfranchised, I mean if you're black, if you're a woman, if you're trans, what have you, look into firearms training, looking to protect yourself. I honestly think that we, as the proletariat, also need to learn how to to protect ourselves. If you can get with Eddie and learn some moves to get away from people, or if you want to get hit up Nick to learn some hand to hand combat so that you can protect yourself too. Look these brothers up, you know, because I'll be honest with you, as we continue down this descent into this late stage of capitalism, every single time, there's a movement that emerges, the oligarchs, they want to make sure that you're suppressed constantly. And if you try to fight against it, they're going to try to take you down. So that's all I got to say.
Agreed. How do you fight against armed bodies of the state? Have armed bodies of the people for self-defense and for protection, not for offense like the capitalists do, but for
Hmm.
protecting ourselves. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that was covered very well in George Jackson's book, and which I read on my Rockfin channel. So I think that's a really good point too. So just to let you know, just to ask, where can they find you? I already have your Twitter page as well as your YouTube channel and your TikTok in the description. But if you could just let people know where they can find you, and your socials.
Thank you. Yeah, we're on TikTok at MidwesternMarks.com, Midwestern Marks on YouTube as well as Twitch. JB's getting me hooked up with Rockfin, so I'll be doing that soon, hopefully, but not yet. We're also on Facebook at Midwestern Marks. Twitter's Marks Midwest. I've got a private Twitter account that I use for like more personal tweets called Edby from Midwestern Marks, EDBIE. So you can look that up if you're interested in that. And yeah, mostly we do streams on Twitch and YouTube and then post TikToks and stuff though.
Nice, nice. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I mean, this was a great conversation, and I love, and I said this, when we before we went live, is that I love that us as groups and us as different um independent commentators are now cross pollinating and being able to talk to each other and to spread this message, that we all have more power than we realize.
Absolutely. Yes, I love it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Mhm.
I haven't done a lot of this where I've gone on other people's shows. I'm trying to do more, but I'm really glad I got to start with RBN and with you,
Yeah.
JB, because you guys have, awesome show, awesome thing going on that I really respect and admire. So thank
Mhm.
you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Uh, Eddie Liger, everybody. Thank you so much for having, and I'll see you on Twitter.
You bet. Sounds good.
All right, bye.
All right. See you.
All right, everybody. So I just want to welcome, everybody. And I also want to get to some super chats just to let you guys know. We have David. Thank you so much for the super chat saying, comrades. David continues, says, a perfect topic, how to approach discussion. Thank you so very much. Aspen Fallen says, loving this conversation. Thank you so much for the super chat as well. Very much appreciated. And yeah, so I mean, I think one of the best things about having these conversations is that you can appeal and you can actually talk to people. It may not happen overnight, right? But the point is to lay these seeds. And let's be real, there's a lot of conservative people in the black community that people like me, Sabby, CJ, Nick, and Rome have to talk to in order to open them up. There's a lot of black people in the community that are literally against immigration. And how do we talk to them and letting them know that immigrants aren't the problem? It's actually the oligarchs. Yes, that exists in the black community too. Oh, yeah. Trust me, it happens. So the thing is that we also have people that we have to talk to in the black community too, right? These people who are or who are part of the hustle culture, the rise and grinds, who think that you're in your position in life because you just didn't rise and grind enough or you didn't hustle enough, so it's your fault. Yeah, we got to talk to them. And so the thing is that it just doesn't rest on people who are white and people who are conservative. It's also some black people who are conservative who have been brainwashed. Also, some people who may be Latino or Latina or Asian. Guess what? Everybody. And the thing is that, talking to these workers, that's what we do in order to lay these seeds and to take the objective history from what we learn, not the State Department narrative, and show people like, look, this is what your government has been doing. And it hasn't been on your behalf, it's been on the behalf of the billionaires. They don't want you to have a democratic say over your workplace. And they don't want you to get the surplus labor from the work that you've been doing because they're supposed to be the job creators when in reality you are the wealth creator. But so the best part is that you're laying these seeds and saying, look, we can't have maternal and paternal leave paid in this country. We can't have tuition-free education for all in this country. We can't have housing for all in this country. We can't have health care for every single person in this country without having to worry about the barrier of cost. We don't have to worry about that. We can have a country where the environment is healthy and we can ensure it for our future generations. We can have a country where our public safety is not a threat. Are the people who are supposedly implementing public safety aren't a threat to its own citizens. That's what laying these seeds are for. That's what it's all about. And so sitting here and talking to Eddie was really great because he was giving more of the academic analysis along with it. And I think it's important for us to talk and to take the street layman and the academic analysis and combine them so that we can actually learn fully in a more well-rounded way. So yeah, we can do that. And so, yes, Lady Alex, remember the French Revolution? Yes, thank you. And so that's why I love having these conversations. and I'm just happy to have him on, and I can't wait to get the rest of Midwestern Marxists on RBN and on my channel as well to have more of these conversations, you know. So I think that will be really cool. Where Pilgrim says, I think Eddie did a TikTok shouting out RBN a few weeks ago for their mutual aid work. Yes, he did. And I retweeted it. It was very kind, and I definitely um, appreciate it. And I saw it, and I was just like, "Whoa, okay, cool." So that was great. Um, just to let you guys know, um, hang on. I'm sorry. I was just reading. I don't know if I should read this on my stream, but you know what? I'm gonna share. I'm gonna share it in the chat. It was what was written to Martin Luther King Jr. I think that is also important. I had that. I was gonna read it with Ed, while Eddie was here, but at least you guys have that as a receipt, basically. Take it, screenshot it, save it, use it as a teaching tool, so that even if there are some um, people who um, maybe not very genuine on the right who talking about the FBI, and it may be kind of a cynical view, just for this one instance. You can also solidify their history of what they've been doing to this country by showing that receipt. So I can't paraphrase it, Gene. I can't. Yeah. So, but I am going to head out because number one, my brother is hungry. Number two, I was planning on ending this actually about 20 minutes ago, but the conversation was that good. I can't wait to have another one of these conversations. Oh, and be sure to tune in on my channel this Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then on top of that, be sure to tune in to RBN later tomorrow. And then RBN Live. I should be there on RBN Live this Tuesday at 4. And yeah, thank you so much. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Ware. Appreciate it. I was like, I'm feeling kind of bright and happy today. So let's go yellow. All right. So I just want to thank you all for tuning in and doing the most. I want to wish you peace, blessings. Oh, did y'all like the stream? I gotta make sure I do my duties. Did y'all like the stream? I mean, make sure to like the stream before you go. After the rant that I gave earlier, some people may have given me a thumbs down, but it's whatever. Oh well, that's the way the cookie crumbles, or the fig Newton crumbles. And please make sure to click the link bell as well as subscribe. And thank you to all the patrons on Patreon once again, because without you guys, then there would be no light. So thank you so much. And water your plants, water yourselves, leave the world better than you found it. Hang on. I'm gonna let out with a song. I just wanna hang on. I don't know. I'm just so got it. I'm just feeling goofy today. So all right. Forehead kisses to all you tenderonies. All right. The truth about her Roni, she's a sweet old girl. She's about the sweetest little girl in the whole wide world. She make the toughest old boy fall deep in love. She wants having Roni, you will never give her up. She's a special kind of girl. Daddy feel proud. You know the kind of girl that stands out in the crowds. Found a tender Roni and the Roni is so right. I think I'm gonna love her for the rest of my life.